Rewriting the past. Kayla stared blankly at the 2 pregnancy tests on the bathroom counter, their bold pink lines mocking her with clarity. Her hands trembled as she thought about the implications. Pregnant. The word echoed in her mind, both a promise and a curse. She was carrying the child of Marcus, her husband of 3 years, a man she had loved fiercely but who had betrayed her repeatedly. Their marriage had been a facade for far too long. Marcus had a knack for manipulation, always convincing her that his late nights at the office and whispered phone calls were normal. At first she had believed him. He was the man who had swept her off her feet in university, the one who had made her believe in fairy tales. But the illusion had shattered piece by piece, leaving behind only the sharp edges of reality. But over time, the cracks had become impossible to ignore. The way he dismissed her feelings, his sharp words when she questioned him, the coldness that had crept into their home. Kayla had once dreamed of building a family full of love and warmth, but Marcus had turned their marriage into a gilded cage. He adored her family's wealth and connections, but treated her as little more than an accessory to his ambitions. Her chest tightened as she remembered the strange changes in Marcus's behavior over the past months, the increasingly frequent work dinners, the phone calls he would answer in hushed tones before stepping out of the room, the excuses that felt too rehearsed. A lingering sense of unease had wrapped around her like a suffocating fog, but she had brushed off her suspicions, blaming herself for overthinking. Now, as the pregnancy test stared back at her, she knew she couldn't ignore the gnawing doubt any longer. For weeks she had brushed off her suspicions, blaming herself for overthinking. But now, as the pregnancy tests stared back at her, she knew she couldn't ignore the gnawing doubt any longer. She decided to follow him the next evening, her heart pounding as she played the role of an amateur detective, but she was determined. That night Marcus kissed her on the cheek and claimed he was heading to a work dinner. Kayla smiled tightly, wishing him a good evening. As soon as he left, she grabbed her keys and followed his car, keeping a safe distance. Her stomach churned as he pulled into the parking lot of a small, upscale apartment complex. She parked a few spots away and watched as he entered one of the units, carrying a bouquet of flowers. Kayla's hands shook with rage and disbelief. She waited for over an hour, battling the urge to storm inside. Finally, she saw Marcus again. This time, he was with a woman. Claire. She recognized her instantly from photos on Marcus's phone that he had claimed were just co-workers. The two laughed and embraced before Marcus kissed Claire, his hand lingering possessively on her growing belly. Kayla's world shattered. Claire was pregnant too. Her husband wasn't just cheating. He was building a secret life with another woman. She drove home in a daze, her mind racing with anger and betrayal. The lights of the city blurred through her tears as she replayed the scene over and over in her mind. The moment Marcus returned, she confronted him, her voice shaking but resolute. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice trembling but determined. "I told you at a work dinner," Marcus replied smoothly, loosening his tie. "Stop lying. I followed you, Marcus. I saw you with Claire. I saw everything." Marcus froze, his face blanching before hardening into defiance. "So what if you did? Maybe it's better this way. Claire and we're having a child too. I didn't want you to find out like this, but now that you know, I think it's time we go our separate ways." The coldness in his voice was the final blow. Marcus had never loved her. He had only loved what she could give him, the status, the money, the connections. And now he was casting her aside without a shred of remorse. Kayla sank to the bathroom floor later that night, tears streaming down her face, the weight of her broken heart pressed down on her chest until she could barely breathe. As she sat there, consumed by sorrow, a strange sensation swept through the room, a warm, golden glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. The air grew thick with the scent of jasmine and something more ancient, something almost electric. She wiped her eyes and looked up, startled, as a figure began to materialize before her. The figure, a man, seemed to step out of the golden light itself, his form shifting as though he were both solid and ethereal at once. He was dressed in a sharp suit that shimmered like liquid gold under the dim light, his skin glowing faintly as though it carried the sun within. His eyes, dark and deep, twinkled with mischief and something far more enigmatic. Around him, the golden glow seemed alive, curling and twisting like smoke, whispering secrets she couldn't quite hear. "Hello, Kayla," the man said, his voice smooth and resonant, carrying an otherworldly quality that sent a shiver down her spine. "I'm Rami, your Genie." Kayla blinked, her grief momentarily giving way to confusion. What?" "Your Genie," he repeated, a faint smile playing at the corners of his lips. "And it looks like you're in need of a fresh start," he said, crouching down gracefully to meet her gaze. His movements were fluid, almost unnervingly so, as though the laws of gravity didn't fully apply to him. "I'm here to help you get one. I can grant you one wish." Kayla narrowed her eyes, crossing her arms defensively. "A genie? Really? Did I hit my head or something?" Rami chuckled, the sound warm but laced with an edge of knowing. "Skepticism is natural. Humans rarely trust what they can't explain, but I assure you I'm as real as the pain you're feeling now, and I'm offering you a chance to change it." Kayla's laughter came out bitter and hollow. "Right. Sure. If you're real, why don't you just snap your fingers and fix everything?" Rami's smile widened, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "That's not how it works, my dear. The wish is yours to choose, and the path forward depends on your decisions. I can only provide the opportunity." She studied him, her mind racing. Every instinct told her this couldn't be real, that she was hallucinating from the stress. But there was something about the way he looked at her, as though he could see the very fabric of her soul. That made her hesitate. "Okay," she said finally, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Send me back to university. Maybe I can stop myself from falling for Marcus and ruining my life." Rami's grin turned sly, his expression almost triumphant. "Done." Before she could process his words, the golden light surged around her, enveloping her in a cocoon of warmth and dizzying energy. Whispers filled the air, growing louder and louder until they became a symphony of sound. Then, everything went silent. When she opened her eyes, she was no longer in her luxurious but empty home. She was standing in the middle of her university dorm room, the walls plastered with posters of bands she hadn't thought about in years. Kayla gasped and ran to the mirror. Her reflection was youthful, her skin smooth and glowing, free of the lines stress and heartbreak had carved over the years. Her hair, always a little more dull in recent memory, now seemed to shine with life. She looked down at her hands, her engagement ring to Marcus conspicuously absent. A knock at the door made her jump. She opened it to find Ethan, her childhood best friend, grinning at her with his usual boyish charm. His auburn hair was a little messy, and his green eyes sparkled with the kindness she'd always overlooked. "Kayla, you're going to be late to class," he said. "Let's go." She stared at him, overwhelmed by a rush of emotions. Ethan had always been there for her, hadn't he? Through every bad decision, every heartbreak. He had loved her. She saw it now, so clearly. And she had ignored him in favor of Marcus, the charming, ambitious man who had swept her off her feet but destroyed her in the end. Not this time, she thought, not again. On an impulse, Kayla turned to Ethan and wrapped her arms around him in a sudden, heartfelt hug. Ethan stiffened in surprise. Kayla wasn't the kind of person to show affection so openly, but after a moment he relaxed and hugged her back, his warmth and steadiness grounding her in a way she hadn't expected. "Kayla?" he asked softly, pulling back just enough to meet her eyes. "Are you okay?" She nodded, smiling through a rush of emotions. I'm just glad you're here, Ethan. You've always been here." Kayla decided to take Rami's gift seriously. As she walked to her first class, she caught a faint golden shimmer in the corner of her vision, but when she turned to look, it was gone. Shrugging it off as her imagination, she went to class but avoided the spot in the lecture hall where Marcus sat. Instead, she chose a seat next to Ethan, who looked surprised but pleased. "Switching things up?" he teased. "Maybe I've been sitting in the wrong spot all along," she replied, giving him a smile that made his cheeks flush. Over the following weeks, Kayla did everything differently. There were moments when things seemed almost too perfect, like the time Marcus tripped in the library while trying to approach her, and she thought she saw a faint, golden flicker behind a shelf. She didn't answer Marcus's texts or flirt back when he tried to charm her in the library. Instead, she spent her time with Ethan, laughing over old memories and making new ones. When Marcus invited her to a campus party he was hosting, Kayla smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, I already promised Ethan I'd help him with his project tonight, maybe next time." Ethan's surprised grin made the moment even better. Another time, Marcus tried to catch her attention by offering her a seat at his usual table in the cafeteria. Kayla glanced at Ethan, who was balancing an absurdly tall stack of books, and called out, "Ethan, let me help you with those." Leaving Marcus dumbfounded, she walked off to help Ethan, laughing as they tried to keep the books from toppling over. Their study sessions became a mix of genuine focus and lighthearted moments. When Ethan complained about his physics homework, Kayla showed up with a mug of coffee and a ridiculous doodle of a superhero labeled Captain Ethan, solver of equations, that made him burst out laughing. Even during group projects, Kayla made it clear where her loyalties lay. When Marcus joined her group uninvited, she deftly redirected the conversation to highlight Ethan's contributions and ideas, leaving Marcus flustered and sidelined. Ethan, oblivious to the deliberate snubs Kayla orchestrated, simply thought she was being supportive. As Marcus's frustrations mounted, Kayla couldn't help but notice how much his academic struggles amused her. Without her meticulous help on assignments and her knack for explaining concepts, Marcus barely scraped by on exams. During one particularly tense lecture, the professor handed back a test, announcing the lowest grade in the class. Kayla couldn't suppress a smirk when Marcus muttered a curse under his breath, crumpling his paper in frustration. She even caught Ethan trying to stifle a laugh when Marcus fumbled through a presentation, his usual confidence replaced by awkward stammering. It was through these moments that their bond deepened, leaving Marcus's presence to fade into the background as nothing more than a forgotten mistake. It wasn't long before Ethan confessed his feelings. One evening, as they sat on the campus lawn under the stars, a warm breeze stirred the air, carrying with it a faint, familiar scent of jasmine. Kayla froze for a moment, glancing around as if she might catch a glimpse of something unseen, but Ethan's voice brought her back. "But I never thought you'd see me that way." Kayla's heart swelled. "Ethan, I was blind before, but I see you now, and I think I've fallen for you." Their first kiss was sweet and filled with the promise of something lasting. Kayla felt a joy she hadn't known in years, a sense of rightness she had never felt with Marcus. But Kayla wasn't just here for love. She was here for revenge, too. She knew Marcus's playbook by heart. He'd start dating Claire, then juggle her with another girl, all while pretending to be the perfect boyfriend. Without Kayla by his side to help him with assignments or polish his essays, Marcus quickly began to struggle academically. It wasn't long before he was failing his classes, his polished facade cracking under the pressure. Kayla made it her mission to subtly sabotage his plans wherever she could. She accidentally spilled coffee on Claire during a group project, ruining her presentation. She spread rumors about Marcus's two-timing ways, making sure every girl on campus thought twice before dating him. The sight of Marcus stumbling over his words and trying to charm his way out of failing grades brought a newfound sense of justice to Kayla. It was both hilarious and cathartic to watch Marcus flounder. For once, he wasn't the king of the campus. And Kayla, with Ethan by her side, felt empowered and free. By the time graduation rolled around, Kayla and Ethan were inseparable. On their final evening as students, under a sky lit with the soft glow of lanterns from a campus festival, Ethan knelt in the park where they'd shared so many moments. "Kayla," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion, "will you let me spend the rest of my life proving how much you mean to me?" Tears streamed down her cheeks as she said yes without hesitation. Years later, as Kayla stood in the nursery of their cozy home, preparing for the arrival of their twins, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had been given a second chance, and she had used it to rewrite her story. Ethan walked in, wrapping his arms around her from behind and placing a kiss on her cheek. "Are you happy?" he asked. Kayla smiled, tears of joy in her eyes. "More than I ever thought possible." And in the corner of the room, invisible to them both, Rami watched with a satisfied grin, his golden glow flickering softly like a candle in the wind. "Another happy ending," he mused, his voice almost wistful. "Humans are a delightful mess, but when they get it right, it's worth all the trouble." With a final flourish, he traced a shimmering sigil in the air, leaving the nursery bathed in warmth and serenity as he disappeared into the ether.